So firstly, thank you for coming. You have the rarest of rare birds with you here today, 2 female executives at a tech company. That doesn't happen very often, but we're about to change that. And you're going to help us do that with what you're bringing to the industry as you graduate from school. Before I start, how many are engineering students here today versus business? Pretty much. A lot of engineering. Business? Anyone for business? 1, 2, excellent. You're my people. Everybody else, you need to talk to Killian. So before I start, who knows anything about Veritas? You're not allowed to answer. Anything about Veritas at all? Because this makes it really easy for me to make up lies if you don't know anything. Okay, all right, so we're going to assume no one knows anything about Veritas, and that's okay, because actually we're very much an enterprise software company. And really, I suppose, our focus is all about data. Now, I am super jealous of you guys that are studying now, because you have access to, and I don't know how many of you are doing classes in data science. Is it something you're doing here? Yes? Excellent. When I was in university, back in the prehistoric period, we didn't really have a whole lot of focus on data science. At the time, actually, it was all about statistics, and I took several classes in statistics because I loved the idea of getting a whole load of data and trying to make sense of it and figure out what it's all about and what it's doing. But there wasn't very much you could do with that back in the prehistoric period, apart from become a maths teacher or a professor. Today, for people that love data, there is so much opportunity. So I am super jealous that I'm not 20. And for very many reasons, I'm super jealous that I'm not 20. But one of them is that if I had my time back, I would spend my time focusing on data. And that is what Veritas do. We focus on data. So let me show you just a few. I'm going to build this out. So again, I'm not telling you anything I'm sure that you don't know already, but the rate of data growth is exploding. I was reading some stats before I came here today because, this is all very interesting, but not very, relevant. So some stuff that I read today, which actually completely surprised me. Did you know that every minute of every day, 567,000 photos are shared on Snapchat? I was like, 567,000? It's amazing. Every minute of every day. Every day, 163 million emails are sent. And they reckon there's going to be 9 billion email users by 2019, which is amazing because there are actually only 7 billion people in the world. So I don't know where the other 2 billion are coming from, but they're talking about 9 billion email users. All of those users, all of those people, all of those interactions are creating data, masses and masses of data. That is data that needs to be stored, it needs to be protected, it needs to be recoverable in the case of an emergency. But also, think about it, you've got all this data on people. What could you learn? What can you do with the data that you have? At Veritas, that's our mission. Figuring out how to both protect, store, manage, and get value from the data that all of us, regardless of whether we are consumers or students or enterprises, are creating. But data does create its own complexities. And this is kind of relevant for you guys because you're going to graduate and you're going to be looking for roles in the software industry or maybe roles in IT. And what we're seeing is that data explosion is changing, dramatically changing IT departments and not just in the tech industry, but across all industries globally. Things like ransomware attacks. Did any of you guys read about the ransomware attack in the city of Atlanta last year? No? Yes? I would advise you to read this. It's a super fascinating story. So there was the city of Atlanta, local government, was attacked with a ransomware attack. And basically, all of the systems that they have, so like the DMV, the local government, where you went to register, to vote, everything that a local government will do was held to ransom. And they had to pay a fine. Eventually, Atlanta actually did pay the fine, but it took months for them to recover from that attack. And that's increasingly happening. It's terrifying to an enterprise, the idea that their data could be held to ransom. And so one of the things that they are very focused on, that we are hugely hugely focused on from a Veritas perspective is how do we protect a company from a ransomware attack, and how do we help them to recover from it? Ransomware attacks creating massive anxiety. If you're doing courses on security and data security, good choice, majorly important. Cloud, I mean, again, I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but the conversion to cloud, or the move to cloud by companies and by users and by consumers, is accelerating. We have some interesting stats on this. I mean, the smaller companies and consumers are now almost completely cloud-focused, using cloud all of the time. Larger enterprises, less so. I mean, there was a sense, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, large enterprise were talking to us and saying things like, yeah, we think 40% of our workloads and our data will be in the public cloud by 2020. That isn't happening at that pace, but it is happening. And what's interesting about this is initially we thought, yeah, most big companies will choose a cloud and they will go with that cloud. They will choose AWS, or they will choose Azure, they will choose Google, and they'll focus on that one cloud. That's not actually what happened. A bit like, I suppose, I use, because I'm old, Facebook to stay in touch with my friends in Ireland. I use Twitter to get my news. I use Instagram to follow fashion followers. And I use Snapchat for the things that we won't talk about. Companies do the same thing. They use AWS for some of their production workloads. They'll use Azure for some of their others, and certainly all of their Microsoft apps will be on an Azure cloud. They'll use Google for, actually, increasingly, big data and analytics because of what Google have focused on in their cloud. They'll use IBM for something else. They have multiple clouds that they are running and that they need to manage. And again, that creates complexity because you have some data here and you have some data there. You still have data in your data center because you're not going to let that go anywhere else. And you need to continue to manage all of that data. Creates challenges, creates complexity. Data growth we've already talked about. It's exploding, et cetera, going to continue to explode. There is no question about that. Big data and big data analytics. As I said at the start, I mean, if I had my time back again, that's certainly where I would focus. For me, I don't have my time back again, but big data and big data analytics is a huge trend, particularly in enterprise companies. Again, think about it. There's a good reason why. There is masses and masses of data being created. So imagine you're a healthcare provider and you've got, 10 million users, each of whom have their own healthcare issues. Maybe you've also gathered their DNA. I went to sidebar tangential story, which is a terrible habit of mine, but anyway, you'll indulge me. I went to my primary healthcare physician last week, and we were just chatting, and I said, I got my 23andMe profile. Turns out I'm 99.99% Irish, which, a bit like every other Irish person there is. But anyway, she said, that's super interesting. Would you be willing to share your DNA information with me? Would you be willing to share your 23andMe information with us? Because then we can, I suppose, get some more predictive analytics around your future healthcare. And I'm like, well, yeah, okay, I don't have a problem with that, so I'm sharing that. But it's interesting for me that healthcare providers are starting to ask those questions. It's not just about the interaction and me taking, a medical history, how healthy is my mom or how healthy is my dad. They're now actually taking the information, cross-matching it, and over time you can assume that they're going to start telling me things like, if you're not careful with the amount of wine that you drink, you may get liver disease. Now, frankly, that's probably, something I don't need a doctor to tell me. But anyway, the point being that big data and analyzing data is something that's increasingly happening, not just in the healthcare field, but in the financial field, in industry generally. Investment in Hadoop clusters exploding. And that is something that I think for you guys, as you graduate, and again, I'm just banging the drum about data science being so interesting, that this is an area of real investment. So if you're interested in there, that's all goodness. Compliance. As data explodes, as we start to share more, increasingly companies and countries are concerned about, well, let's make sure that we're not misusing that data. So who knows anything about GDPR? Okay, so GDPR, worth actually knowing about as well, so maybe it's something to read up on. But GDPR is the data protection regulations that were introduced in the EU last year. And essentially what it means, it's kind of it's interesting because it could create an entire industry, frankly. But in any case, let me tell you what it is first. It says that all companies that have data on you, you are entitled as a user individually to contact any company anywhere, say, what data do you have on me? You are entitled to see that data, and then you are entitled to tell them that they, have to delete it, they have to get rid of it, and they have to prove that they have done so. Because it's your data, it's on you, and it's private to you. And they call that PII. Now, what's interesting is if a company is in breach of the GDPR regulations, there are fines to up to 4%. Is it 4%? I think it's 4% of their revenues. It's huge money. Actually very relevant in the context of Ireland because a lot of the large data generating companies like Facebook and Google have all of their data centers in Ireland because the weather is good and tax is good and lots of other reasons for that. But then neither here nor there. The point being that in Ireland, we really had to think about, wow, how are we going to manage these data regulation requests that they're coming through? And then frankly, the biggest issue again is you have all this data, but unless you've started doing this, you don't even know what you have. We estimate that 50% of data that's created is dark. What that means is we don't actually know what it is. And when I say we, I don't mean Veritas. We, humanity, does not know what it is. We know we have terabytes and terabytes and petabytes of data on servers in the cloud or servers in the data center. We don't know what it is. But we also probably aren't going to get rid of it because we're just too afraid. Well, shit, maybe it's really important. We don't know what's in there, but you're not going to get rid of it either. So the analytics to even understand what you have is important, not just so you can learn from it, but also so that you can comply with regulations like GDPR. These are all ways in which data is changing IT environments. And I suppose this slide is probably saying a little bit about the same thing. Okay, so from a Veritas perspective, and just bringing it back to Veritas and what we do and why data matters, our focus is on enabling protection in all of those scenarios, but also analytics and understanding around what that data is. So, for example, security. We say security is incomplete without data protection. And let me explain what I specifically mean there. So in the event that you have a ransomware attack, for example, one way that you can deal with it is you can try and prevent the attack coming in. You can try and prevent it at the firewall. Most companies do that. Frankly, we would say it's absolutely do it, don't not do it, but it's probably a flawed approach because you're never going to be able to prevent every firewall attack that you get. So you need a second line of defense. What's the second line of defense? The second line of defense is that you have a recoverable asset, that you have a backup, a point-in-time backup that you can use to recover your data. That's what went wrong in Atlanta. They didn't have recoverable point-in-time backups of all of their systems, so they were going back months. And then they had lost all of that intervening data. They had to work off paper. It was a nightmare. So security, incomplete without a second line of defense, without a second line, and that second line of defense that we would suggest is an enterprise backup. Cloud. So for all that we say, cloud is the future, and don't get me wrong, it absolutely is. It's not actually cheap yet. So they reckon, there's some differing theories on this, that if you have anything more than 50 terabytes of data, which, believe me, is a ton, it's a big, big, big number. But if you have anything more than 50 terabytes of data, it's not economically viable is the wrong word, but it doesn't make sense economically to move your data to the public cloud. You may as well maintain your enterprise data center. But that's going to change. Cloud is going to get cheaper, and companies, frankly, will get to a point where they're like, the hassle of maintaining my own enterprise data center, I just don't want it. I'm going to move it to the cloud, even though it's slightly more expensive anyway. However, there is a better way. Well, not the better way, but there is another way. And so what we would suggest is that as you move your workloads to the cloud, you need to have a management system that helps you determine where to move it. I'm sure you know the difference between S3 and Glacier and hot and cold storage. What we provide at Veritas is an ability to say, well, if your data is data that you access on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, you probably want that near. You don't want that too far away where it's going to take a long time for you to be able to access it. So you'd put that out in S3. But if your data is something that you don't access ever really, think about it as your I don't know, email archive that you had from when you were in high school. It's something that you want to keep because you never know when you're going to need that information. But at the same time, you don't need to see it every day. You're going to put that out in cold storage, which is a lot cheaper. So a data management solution to help you determine how to manage your various clouds, super important. Storage, same thing here. You have storage that you have on your enterprise data center, you have it in your cloud, you have it in a private cloud environment. Again, you want to be able to make policy-based choices about what gets stored where, and then frankly, who can access it. So role-based access control to your storage, massively important. Analytics, kind of talked about it already. I'm still super fascinated by it, but in an analytics, when you're running a huge Hadoop cluster that's 50, 60, 70 terabytes in size, you want to be able to get that data quick. You don't want to, it's not like the 60s where you're running it on mainframes and you start the job on a Monday and you get it back like the following Tuesday, week afterwards. You want to be able to get the answers to your data quickly. Again, which means organizing the data in such a way that it can be analyzed fast and that it can return data quickly. And lastly, compliance. I've kind of talked a bit about this already. In order to comply with regulations, you kind of have to know what you have, and you have to know what and how to classify it. Because again, going back to the GDPR example, let's say, for example, I decide I want to know everything that Facebook has on me, which is, a series of cat videos or whatever it is I've posted over the years, but for whatever reason, I want to know. So I send my request off to Facebook. They need to be able to, first of all, find me. Then they need to be able to classify my data to say, yeah, we have all this data. Most of it is kind of pointless cat videos. But actually, there was one thing that, is probably classified information that we would call PII, and we're going to separate it and put it out here to the side and talk to you about that in a different way to the cat video example. So classification on data, and that's on a personal level. When you think about that at an enterprise level, same kind of thing is required. You need to know what is important versus what is not that important. For example, I'm working on a project right now that's under NDA, which means I can't talk about it. So this is all I'm saying. But in any case, I'm under a project that's on NDA. We need to be able to, at Veritas, determine we need to be able to find the data, the emails that I'm talking about this particular project on, and classify them off to the side. So again, there's, use things like metadata and code words in order to be able to do it. But the important thing is it has to happen, because for legal release purposes, that data has to be available to the legal team subsequently. Classification, hugely important. So, sorry, I keep wandering too far. It's all right. Let's just quickly talk about the portfolio, and then I'm going to shut up and hand over to Killian for the interesting stuff. So, what I've talked about, everything that I've talked about just now, gives you an overview of the solution set that Veritas is working towards. We define it in these general areas of data protection, storage, compliance, and disaster recovery. But the key thing that I'm not going to talk about the products here because you'll all be bored. The key thing I want to emphasize on this slide is that for all of the things, I guess, for want of a better word, that we talked about on the previous slide to work well together, we need to have those products integrate and talk well with each other. We need to have APIs that can communicate together. We need to have user interfaces that make sense to users as they work across different products. So, for example, when you have a backup admin that's looking to use NetBackup to create their enterprise backup, but then they want to use VRP to recover that backup from AWS, we need to create a seamless experience for that same user to navigate from one product to the other, such that it doesn't feel jarring, and it doesn't feel difficult, and it doesn't feel hard. Because one thing that we know is that increasingly in IT departments, if it's hard, if it's jarring, they're not going to want to use it. I mean, who wants to use a product that has poor design? Which is the perfect segue for me to hand over to Killian, who's going to talk a little bit about design thinking in the context of the Veritas portfolio. So, Killian, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Orla. Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me okay. All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is why I'm here. Not existentially, not literally, but why are there roles for VP level and chief design officers at companies these days? Not just in the Valley, but at older companies Kaiser Permanente, the healthcare biz, AT&T, your wireless, Ford Motor Company, making cars. Maybe that one might be a little bit more obvious. You design cars. But I really want to talk to you about why design is important. And at the end of this conversation, hopefully, well, actually, at the end of this conversation, I have an ask of you, which hopefully you'll take up the mantle of. And that ask goes to everyone. So business students, you are not off the hook. You are definitely on my hook. In fact, I may be speaking to you as well, heavily. So Veritas, if you don't know, Orla's given you a fabulous definition. It's also Latin, and it means truth. And I find that very telling from a design perspective, because often when you talk about design, you talk about truth, and you talk about the definition of good. And we're going to hold to those two constructs as we go forward in our talk. So I was hired, particularly at Veritas, because the problem statement that was given to me was, hey, we don't know how to define good. We've got great products, we believe, but we're seeing some slag in the market. Do people recognize us? Do they love us? Is our brand aware? How can you up-level that? So first you have to define what good is. So the first thing I did at Veritas was I talked about creating a set of design principles. And they're pretty simple, and we only have 3 because humans can only remember 4 things at a time. It's true. You may think that your capacity is here. I can prove to data that your capacity is about here. Maybe a little more, you're a superstar.
We're young though.
It's all the same. In fact, actually, as you age, you remember different things. We can talk about that separately. Principle number 1, it has to be simple. Now, simple isn't just removing what's making easy versus hard. It is actually the hardest thing to do, because to make something simple, you have to remove the complexity, which means you have to understand it thoroughly. And you have to be able to identify what is its core elements, distill it, understand human behavior and how humans interact with technology, which I believe is a fascinating field. It's what I do. And then create something that is new and has value and is good as part of that. So simple. Seems easy, but it's not. Intuitive. You guys are probably too young to remember, but maybe you do. Let's see. Do you remember the first time you held the iPhone? It was probably the 3rd generation. Do you remember? I do. If you ever held the 1st generation versus the 3rd generation, there was a design tweak. And we all went, ah. And if you'd studied design, the tweak that was made was it went from a hardcore straight line edge to curve. Look at our hands. Do you know how many points are on our hands? Do you know that when Ed Catmull created the first 3D rendering motion visualization using CGI, what was now CGI, back then it wasn't. Do you know how many points he had to create on his hand? It was his PhD thesis. If you don't know who Ed Catmull is, he was the founder of Pixar. This is the most complicated element, really, in the world to model. So when you create something that isn't straight, because this isn't straight, it has curves, and you put that iPhone in the human hand, sales went off like rockets. We didn't even know why we wanted it. We wanted it because it felt good, because it was intuitive. And finally, in this day and age, for all the reasons that Orla just talked about, a good design principle is an engineering principle. It has to be integrated. Because we don't actually think in left brain or right brain. Because our data isn't just all over the place. Because we like organization. As humans, one of the first things we love, which is a good thing about us and a bad thing about us, you'll figure out why in a second, we love to put things in boxes. That's where stereotypes come from. we are really great creatures on the planet at putting things in boxes. And if it doesn't fit in a box, we love to try to figure out how to put it into a box because we like organization. We are habitual by nature. Integration feeds to that construct. So that's why it is my third design principle. Now, we used these design principles to be able to create something new. And so the challenge, the reason that there are roles like mine throughout the valley, throughout the companies these days, and it is a growing field of relevance. The shift happened actually 15 years ago, which is really why a lot of us who are kind of struggling in the field, really, so our career sort of took off at that juncture, is because by using these principles, by bringing in new thought processes, we can change the way we engineer, the way that we define, the way that we create, well, ultimately the way that we create good product. Through its intent, through good design, and through good execution. And we'll talk about those in a minute. But first, I have to at least show you what I've done in the 10 months that I've worked at Veritas, because it's only been about 10 months. So this is what I started with. This is the flagship product at Veritas when I started here. And make no mistake, to change this on those three principles, it was also a hearts and minds campaign. Because I had a lot of engineers, I'm talking to all you right now, who didn't want to hear from a floppy hat and a cravat artist in the corner, who didn't want to talk about or understand why human emotions mattered in this. I can tell you why in a second. I can throw numbers at you too. And so to change from this perspective, which hadn't been touched in about 20 years, to this, took a massive undertaking. And we did it, and we released it in 9 months. So 0 to 9, out the door. Now, those three principles that I talked about, you can find those in design thinking, you can find those in other constructs, and design thinking itself has gotten kind of a bad rap. I'm not going to be here to defend it, but I am going to be here to defend the core principles that are behind it. So what is good? We know that we have to create a good product. I should mention that Net Backup, that 8.12 release I just showed you, that was the #1 highest downloaded release in Veritas' history. Not only did we have to move our internal organizations to think differently, we also had to move all of our end users and customers to think differently as well. They had to make the jump with me. And so I used these same principles on my internal campaign as well as my external. So why is it important and why do I think these values are still relevant? McKinsey, you probably have heard of them. If you're in B school, you should have. They've recently done, there's a 5-year study. They tracked 300 companies. Over a 5-year period, they looked at about 2 million, over 2 million pieces of financial data and over 100,000 what they call design attempts or actions, which were basically deliberate attempts to promote design through the business to be able to promote value. So after 5 years, guess what happened? The companies that adhered to principles and values that were very similar to what I talked about, guess how much their revenue went up? Do you want to shout out a number? It went up for those that did, but how much? It was core revenue. Oh, you're shy. Okay, 32%. 56% higher return for shareholders. 56. Average CEO tenure is about 18 months right now. It's true. If you got these results, you'd probably stay for 3 years, that is. What did these companies do that the others didn't? They defined it, define what is good. They tracked it, Don't get what you don't measure. Still true. They put their users first, like for real. Meaning when you're in your engineering room and you're arguing over what should we do it this way or that way, that's opinion. Fact comes from talking to your users. That is a key mindset change. They embedded designers, the floppy hats and cravats. We get to come out of the corner and be part of the process. And we did tons and tons of research. Those 4 simple things, 56% revenue increase to shareholders. Pretty damn good. So let's talk about what good is. Let's talk about intent, good intent. How many of you have used the pull down to refresh? Is it good? Yes, it is good, but by definition, it is good. You like it? It is good. You're struggling, why would I ask about a thing if it was good? There's a reason. Have you even thought about it as, is it good? If you adhere to my principles, you would think about it. Is it a good interaction? Do you know where it came from? Because I do. Came about 2008. I had a shit fit over it. I lost, but then won. It was delayed gratification. Does it remind you of any other interaction that you can think of on this planet? Yes. Interesting. Not where it came from. That would be benevolent. This was not benevolent. Yes. Bingo. It's a fucking slot machine. You know why we did it? Feeds on your emotions. I want more. What I miss? What I miss? I want more. It's exactly where it came from. Is it good now? No. Is it good if I want eyeballs on a page? Bingo. If I'm selling ad revenue. Was the intent good? Let's question. Now you start to think about what you're doing. If you haven't heard of time well spent, you should, because it's a real evolution, a revolution that's kind of happening here in Silicon Valley, where we're beginning to question our intents of things. What's good design? This one's actually a bit easier. So, I have a toilet bowl in my house. It serves the purpose of collecting water, holding water, and it also, on command, releases water. Yes? That's what a toilet bowl does. It fills back up. Fine. A sink does the same thing. So does a tub. I could replace all these things with a toilet bowl. It just changed the size of the toilet bowl. You'd be fine, right? You'd be fine? You'd want this house? Oh, the hell you would. Because I've seen you all standing in line giggling when you go to the Exploratorium, and in the back, to prove my point, they have a toilet bowl that has been made into a water faucet. And no one drinks. It's a perfectly functioning water faucet, but no one drinks out of it because it's a toilet bowl. Because we have constructs in our being. What's really fascinating is when you join companies and you get into rooms and you're defining this product, you will, I promise you, suffer the fate of wanting to either A, make a toilet bowl for every single thing, recognize what you're doing, because your users will tell you to fly a kite, because they're not drinking out of a toilet bowl, or B, you will try to paint the toilet bowl pink with glitter and sparkles and sell it to me as something that's a fabulous bathtub. And I won't want that either. So we do have a construct of good design. And that's why things are different. And that's why intuitive becomes very important. To Orla's points about big data, let's talk about good execution. So when I was talking to my team, one of the things that I worked on a project with Veritas was, kind of machine learning and pulling that into some of the products. And when I sat with the engineers, because now they finally believed me, I have some wisdom to impart, they said, Gillian, how do we do this? And I said, oh, well, it's easy. It's the difference between a good dog and a scary robot. Isn't that obvious to you? Yes? It's easy. No, they said, what the hell are you talking about? Let me explain my yoga pants. I worked at Oracle for an awfully long time, during which I helped acquire Blue Kai. So Blue Kai, if you don't know, is one of those insidious companies that run under the pinnings of everything, pulling together all of the stuff that basically knows about who you are, what your persona is, and where you fit in the category, and if you're going to watch the college football game, Michigan playing whomever they're playing this Saturday, which I should know, but I forgot. Kind of creepy. Now, here's my story, which after we bought Blue Kai, this is what happened to me personally, I'm somewhat ashamed to admit, with my yoga pants. So after having twin boys going on, I started buying my pants from Lululemon. I had been buying them from Lululemon for a while. I bought my size large instead of medium. I typically bought mediums before, now I bought a large. I'd had kids, whatever. I was fine with it. I didn't even think about it. But Blue Kai, I knew was running under the covers, right, with a Yahoo integration. I happened to know that because we bought the company and I was doing a bunch of work with them. They served up Weight Watcher ads to me. Fuckers. So I called Rick Smith, I shouldn't say his name, but so I called the guy who's the head of Blue Kai, and I said, you SOB, what have you done? I want to know how I modeled, and I want to know what this is. Because you went from helping me in terms of I was looking for a book for my kid, you might like this other book for your kid. Awesome. Nice dog. Good dog. It's helpful. It's diminutive. It's kind of what we want our tech to be, particularly our machine learning tech. To, you fatty, here's Weight Watchers. Scary robot. Now it's like you're monitoring me and I hate it. I have not actually bought anything from Lululemon since then. It's not their fault, but I blame them. So when we get into big data and you get into machine learning, it is so freaking cool right now, and you are so primed to screw it up big. Because there is a line for human expectations. Do not cross it, or you will suffer, meaning your company will not have good revenue. When Google Glass came out, I did an experiment with my team. We went around the world and we just wore them. We didn't even turn them on. I used men, I used women, we did all over different places. We almost got arrested by the cops when I had a couple of guys wear it at a playground. That might have been a bad idea on my part. But it hit the creep level real high. Moms were on their phones in both Amsterdam and New York. What the hell is going on here? There's some creepy dude with Google Glass. Is he filming my kids? I don't know. What's going on? So, good execution matters tremendously in terms of how you acquire value. One more story to tell you, and then I will stop and make sure that we leave questions for you guys. So, what's a good example? Do I have any to impart, now that I've made fun of slot machines and everything else, of good intent, good design, and good execution? I do have one. An entrepreneur in Kenya, whose name I forgot, and I apologize. I was trying to Google it feverishly before I came, because her name is not in my head, has done a fabulous thing. She graduated from the University of Wharton Business School. She went back to her home country. And there she saw two problems that really bothered her. One, she saw a lot of plastics that were not being recycled. Two, she saw a lot of farmers that were killing wild animals, to which Kenya, actually tourism, right, is based on, from seeing wild animals and folks coming on safari and whatnot. So she was rather bothered. How should we solve these problems? They felt overwhelming. She knew two people, one of which was a designer, artist, and the other was a chemical engineer. So what she did was she created a very fledgling recycling program by which they would take the plastics and make them into long cylindrical kind of posts. The designer really worked with the farmers to understand, A, they don't have a lot of tools, so like there's no hammer or anything like that, right? That's not easily readily accessible. Wire was actually somewhat hard to come by, so in terms of wiring these things together. So what they did was they actually designed with a hammer throw action of just your hand, you can sink these long cylindrical things that have jagged pointed edges at the bottom into the ground. You sink several of them, you make a fence that is strong enough to deter most of the wild animals. To date, she has 300 employees, and her product is in use and thriving throughout Kenya. And she's created a very innovative solution to the two problems that were somewhat disconnected when she landed. That's a great example of what great engineering, great ingenuity, great problem solving, and great design can pull together. So I said I was going to make a request of you, and I have, because you are the next generation. You get to come and make great products. You get to come and replace me, replace Orla, and the rest of the old guard that has made somewhat of a mess, some good things, some bad things, as we've tried our hand. My request is that you do this with your eyes wide open, and that you don't make the same mistakes that we have. That you think about your intent, and you think about your product and your execution, and you approach it with thinking about what is good. Because I would love to live and retire in a land where there is benevolence, where that you're literally saving the animals versus creating a slot machine. But the choice is yours. Questions? All right. You need these, apparently, to answer your question. Sorry. Okay. Take my water.
Hi, so you said that basically one of the things you said was really important was creating simple design that's very intuitive. So what I have trouble with that, although it's a very good goal to reach, it feels like for the user, which we're all consumers, it creates an unconscious experience with the product.
Oh, it's interesting, yeah.
So in turn, it's hard to consciously overlook the, like, for lack of a better word, like bad constructs of current design. So how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that from designers all the time. And actually, I go back to I always go back to what humans want, right? Because at the end of the day, so early in my career, I had a sales rep tell me this. He was like, honest to God, if you made a program that knew when I was hungry and put the banana out there, that would be the best thing ever. So then he wouldn't get hangry, right? And later on in the day when he was trying to call customers and sell stuff. So I think honestly the best design truly is rooted in human behavior. And so don't worry less. So data has said worry less about my product has to be in front of the user for them to know and love my product. We will, right? If your product is truly intuitive, even if it's not there, I will love it because I will know that it's there. That value is actually what's important. The label isn't. Does that make sense? And so strive for that value because that's what keeps them. That's what keeps them coming over and over again. It doesn't matter if your logo or if your thing is right in front of me. In fact, I've actually told my team the best design is actually no design. If you ask me today what's going to be the future of the experience, there won't be one. I will have material design so that I don't have this clunky ass watch on top. I will have like a slap wrist. Seriously, Samsung's actually working on it, I happen to know. That will just take the flat, slap it, roll it around. I won't have a laptop that's a bloody hard thing. I'll have scrolls because they're easier to carry. And I can just unroll it, right? It goes straight, I write, I do whatever I need to, rolls back up, gone, off our way. So really push it, actually. It is absolutely fine. As long as you're creating that value with your users, you're gonna be good.
All right, other questions? How did you come to design from political science?
Oh yeah, I wasn't really a poli-sci major too. So I was actually a physics major, and the year before I graduated, so this is gonna sound horrible, so I'm going to apologize ahead of advance about what I'm about to say. So, I was a physics major, high energy spin physics, and loved it. Bottom fell out of physics the year before I graduated in undergrad. And I had a 4-year scholarship, and apparently you can get a poli-sci degree in a year. So that's what I did. But then, my first job was at a think tank in Washington, D.C., where I started actually doing carbon sequestration and regenerative braking, which you might know, right, if you drive a Prius. But we sold some of that tech to Honda, which then couldn't figure out what the fuck to do with it, so they sold it to Toyota, and sorry, I cussed like a sailor. So, and then Toyota took it and actually started moving forward with it. And through that work, I ended up going back to grad school, and then I ended up creating a bunch of, so then I was actually interested in war because I did get a degree in poli-sci, so that was kind of cool. And I wrote a bunch of algorithms for Buena de Mesquita, who you might know if you study poli-sci, Paul Huth and a bunch of others, and sold my programs to a couple 3-letter agencies, and that's how I paid for grad school, whose agency names I can't say those letters. And because the thing that I loved the most about doing all of that was actually creating the interfaces. I just thought it was really super fun. During that period, we moved society, that is, from command line, right? We started launching browsers, right? We started launching Netscape and stuff like that. And that was when I was quit grad school, I quit my PhD program, and came out west to basically build that stuff because I was simply fascinated by it. So I opted in, a rather untraditional path.
Other questions? Yeah, right.
Hello? Cool. So for the both of you, what's one thing you'd like to change about your job to make it better?
Not having to work with Killian.
It's probably true. It's probably is. It's a pain in the butt.
I'm going to take a second. Do you have something obvious?
You know, I love my job. That's what sucks. I actually really do love what I do. I mean, it's going to sound stupid, but I mean, for me, I love the enterprise space. So I worked at eBay, I worked at PayPal, I did the consumer, bored out of my blooming mind. The problems were so blindingly obvious to me that I was bored, truly. It was easy for me. For me, the enterprise is hard because, and that was my ballet slippers slide, I was going to talk about that. So thank you. It is more complicated because your users aren't willing. Your users are trapped, right? They're at Kaiser and they work at Kaiser and they're a nurse or a doctor, and yet they have to use this tool. It's in their way, right, to doing what they consider their primary job, which is to help heal that patient. Yeah, that's terrible. So my stuff is in the worst possible scenario. So if I can create something great in the worst possible condition, that feeds me more than eyeballs on a page. It just does. So, I mean, things I hate about my job, sometimes you pull your hair out, sometimes the tech isn't where I want it to be. I mean, all those things are true. They're going to be true for you too. I mean, at the end of the day though, I truly do love what I do.
I think the same is true for me in some respects, insofar as, yeah, of course, everybody has parts of their job that they don't like. You know, the commute kills me. Yeah, that's always a problem. I go to far too many meetings, and I go to far too many meetings, so I'm sitting in the meeting and going, why am I in this meeting? There's no value in this meeting. Shoot me now, take me out, beat me to death, anything rather than sit in this meeting. But all that being said, those are kind of annoyances rather than things that would change. To advocate and to kind of key off Killian's point a little bit, enterprise is interesting. And I spent a long time working at Symantec in the consumer space, and consumer is kind of easy in many respects. I mean, consumer is, you go out, you buy the thing, you like the thing, you keep the thing. And to Killian's point, in enterprise, you don't have that same simplicity because the CIO goes out, buys the thing, implements the thing. Everyone hates the thing, but the CIO has bought the thing, so you're not going to change the thing because the CIO won't let you, and all of those things are true. So the motivation from a customer perspective differs depending on who you're talking to. And so if you're talking to the CIO, it's all going to be about, yeah, our thing is cheap and it's good. You're going to be happy with that. And then if you're talking to the user, it's all like, yeah, we know you hate the thing, but we're going to try and improve the thing and whatever. It becomes a much more set of complex customer interactions, which for me, brings me back to the data again. We are constantly triangulating, customer intent data over here versus financial data over there, and marrying the two things together to try and build forward-facing projections for our business. But that's what I do. And it's complicated. I love the complexity of that. So it's not necessarily the sexiest part of the industry to be in, enterprise software. But if you're looking for a gnarly, knotty, it's always going to challenge you in ways you can't even imagine, look to the enterprise, because there's some very challenging aspects to being there that make it a lot of fun, if that's what you want.
I would also add one more point on that. So I guess I would reform my answer to also say that it's frustrating in the enterprise space because, it isn't as sexy, right? So your family may never know what you do or get what the company does. This is like, fine. But on the plus side, I read, this is probably 2 years old data, that the enterprise market space, the value cap for the enterprise market, was about 300 trillion.
That's right. It's going to be more than that. Yeah.
So the money is in enterprise. So if you like hard problems and money, I'm sorry, it ain't Twitter.
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned at the beginning, I think it was Orlia that mentioned it, that it was so rare to see 2 women in tech.
Yes.
Okay, 2 women executives in tech. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that is and what we need to be doing differently.
Oh, that is a really hard question to answer. We are a rare breed, and even rarer when it comes to enterprise. Because it's the same thing. A lot of enterprise software companies have been around a long time. Like Veritas is 30 years old, and some of the people that work at Veritas have been there since the very, very beginning. And so you've kind of got a very. It's not always the most dynamic environment that you're operating in. And so it is unusual to see women, certainly in the executive chairs. And I think, what we have struggled with, and Killian and I are both part of a sponsor group of Veritas to sponsor future technical women, is bringing them through the hard years. So here's what happens at Veritas. You guys graduate, you come do an internship at Veritas, you stay for 2 years, you get to do some cool techie things. You learn a lot. And then it's like, we don't really know why after 2 years you then say, I want to go and work at Twitter or wherever. But people do that, and I guess maybe it's so that their mom understands it. I don't know, whatever. But we lose at that point from the enterprise. People start to come back, but then what we've noticed from a gender perspective and the demographics is we lose again about 10 to 12 years in. And that is not just an enterprise software issue, that's just a software issue, an industry issue. Yeah. People opt out, and whether it's the usual sort of demographics of being in your late 20s, early 30s,
Yeah.
or what, we don't know. But what we have to work really hard at is creating an environment where if somebody does step away for 5 minutes, and to go and do something else, that there is a route back for them to,
It's really
for
hard.
people to come back in, and it is really hard. So we've been very focused on trying to create that environment where we'll value your experience over the fact that you've got immediate longevity, to keep the funnel going, because it starts the same and then it just
it changes.
it narrows and it narrows and
Yeah.
it narrows. So we feel responsible as we're both 20 years in now, roughly-ish, in the industry, that it's our job now to make sure that we're supporting the next generation of female talent that's coming through the industry. It's up to us to make sure that we're creating that supportive environment, which is something that you kind of have to constantly remember to do, because you have to remember we came up in the world where you really had to push hard, to be heard and to be listened
Yes.
to, and so there's a whole dynamic around this where it's like, well, if I suffered, everybody else has to suffer too, and we kind of have to remember not to do that. That no, we suffered, sure, but we don't need to pass that suffering down, basically.
Yeah.
So and actually, I say this out loud as often as I can, particularly when I'm talking to students or recent graduates. We need you guys to remind us to do that too, because we can forget and just think, oh, everybody has a voice and everybody can say, what they feel and what they think. But we can forget that it can be hard to speak up. So if you're in a role, in a job, doesn't matter where it is, and you feel like you're not getting, I suppose the time or the attention or the recognition for the work that you're doing, and I say this particularly to the ladies in the room, speak up. Find a female mentor, because we've all gone through it and we all know that we need to have support in order to bring you on. Sorry, this is my personal soapbox, so I am going to stop talking now. You go.
So, I'm flattered you think I'm so young. You leave, is the truth. The women leave. What is her name? Sandra. She had it right. We have kids, it's too much, it's too hard. I know, I have twins. And we step out. That's the truth. And once you step out, it's really hard to step back in. Truth. Which is why her book was about staying, even if you're not as great for those kind of hard years when the kids are little, the value of staying over walking away, because it affects your career trajectory entirely. I have many moms that are in the PTA with my kids who stepped off, one of which has her master's degree from MIT in mechanical engineering. She is brighter than me. I'm a VP position, and she is struggling to get back into the workplace. And she will likely not get back into the workplace, to be very honest with you. So stay in and find support from your family, from your partner, wherever you can get it, to be able to keep on keeping on, because you will lose your spot. And I would love to say that that's going to change. I haven't seen it quite yet, even though we do all of the things. As the industry as a whole, right, outside of any one company, it is still very, very hard. But it is possible to stay. I have twin boys. They see me. They know I'm the mom. I do. So it is possible to do it. Absolutely.
All right, I think we need to stop now, but if you want to come on down and ask your question, we've got a few more minutes before we have to head upstairs. Let's thank our speakers again.
Thank you guys very much.